So welcome to Keen on Yoga, another solo episode, so tune in or tune off as you see fit. What else can I say before starting? Nothing much really. I've got an intensive coming up, so if you fancy doing that online, it's an online intensive, the third year. I'd love to have you there, and you can message me for more details or you've got more questions about that. Anyway, I don't need to advertise anymore at you. Let's make a start. Today's podcast is on emotions in the body. What does it mean when we say we're doing Hatha Yoga or Yoga Asana? Well, first of all, Yoga Asana could just be, as people often say, the Patanjali's asana as a steady seat. An as is a seat, a steady seat for meditation, right? So asana certainly can be used for that. I mean, certainly if you're sitting down and staying still, as the original iterations, the original examples of asana seem to be, sitting down, taking posture, staying still in it, holding oneself steady against the changing world, right? Change is essentially the problem for yoga, really. The world is constantly changing, and we can't get a fair idea of ourselves if the world is constantly changing. So what do? We hold the body steady against the world and come into a kind of isolated, kind of idealized sense of consciousness, right? And this was the Shramanas. If you've read The Roots of Yoga by Jim Mallinson and Mark Singleton, or maybe you haven't, it's not an easy book, but basically that's the premise there, that the roots of yoga come from these Shramanas, these forest ascetics that were using asana, first of all, not even as a steady seat of meditation like Patanjali seems to suggest. They were using it as kind of ascetic practice, hold the body still against nature, hold the body still against the changing world, and you can't deny it. In fact, not only hold it still, but punish it. Hold it still in the sun, in the midday sun. Hold it still, like lying on a bed of nails. I mean, they did these kind of things, right? Maybe they actually have nails, but that kind of thing, right? So there's a penance. Asana was a penance, right? And then having kind of isolated or kind of, let's say, transcended one's attachment, one's identification with the body, because it was completely inert, inanimate, and a site of pain, of physical pain. So there was a kind of mental pulling away. The idea was you get to kind of pure isolated consciousness without all the desire stuff hanging around, right? That's the problem, that the world is changing and the organs of the senses, the sense organs are picking up this change and they're creating other changeful experiences inside as well. So we're changing on the inside, manifesting different desires and aversions as the outside changes for us, right? So it's a bad combination. And in as much as then we're kind of thrown to the wind, right? The Bhagavad Gita, I think it said, someone who doesn't control their senses is like a ship in a storm. They're just constantly buffeted from one thing to the next. And albeit you sometimes have good experiences like that. I mean, I can remember, when I hadn't got any idea about yoga, right? Being at university and just kind of like living, how would you say, from the seat of one's pants, right? Day to day. And you certainly had good experiences like that, right? Like a spontaneous luck. But you had a lot of bad experiences as well, right? I mean, and all in all, I suppose we have to say, the kind of grand kind of umbrella idea of yoga is like, all in all, is a disciplined life of awareness better than a random life of just kind of, as we say in English, making hay while the sun shines, right? You're sort of taking advantage of the good and just suffering along with the bad. Like, basically it's a complete gamble. Is a disciplined, aware life, looking for awareness, better than a life of just seeking pleasure and taking one's chances. And all in all, we have to say, if we can accept that premise, then we can build the rest of the yoga philosophy upon that. That awareness is better than not being aware of consciousness. And not being aware doesn't necessarily mean you're actively turning away. It just means you're allowing yourself to be distracted by desires, right? Allowing oneself to be distracted by all kinds of exciting experience, right? Take you away from yourself into that experience, into that distraction, or try to have a sense of circumspection, somewhat kind of keeping oneself to oneself, kind of metaphorically, and having some kind of game plan to life, I suppose, right? Rather than just, see how it goes and suffer the consequences of our actions. Because in my experience, right, getting personal now, in my experience, that it didn't work, right? I mean, the highs were highs still, but the lows didn't really balance out the highs. The lows were definitely a lot worse than the highs, right? So that capacity, right? You don't need any faith to take on yoga. You don't need to believe in yoga, believe in the method, believe it works. You just think, that doesn't work, right? And then this is the Bhagavad Gita idea, really. And a lot of the argument just shows that it doesn't work. Right? This is normal life doesn't work well. Normal life is it's not a good bet, right? The odds are stacked against you, and the losers are better than the wins, right? So what do? You have to kind of think, okay, well, if it's not working, then we have to try something else. And the something else is to live life in a certain manner, that's more effective than others. Right? This is how we kind of very broadly get into the idea of yoga. So again, you don't have to take anything on faith, really. You say, well, all you have to think is this currently working in the way that I'm leading life? Right? Say, like, as I said, for me, it was, without any method, really, just indulging in the pleasures of a young man, as we say, as we could say, and really not caring, to try and have a game plan, or even having some kind of sense of, I think with awareness, there's also some kind of sense of a code of conduct, right? That goes out the window. So one loses oneself integrity as well. If you don't have a discipline, if you think that non-awareness is better than awareness, that basically it doesn't matter. Then you will also going to infer that you don't really have any kind of sense of particular code of conduct towards other people, because it doesn't matter, right? Basically, right? Which is where you get if you don't take the other steps, right? Unless you're just basically say, well, it only matters as much as there's a morality, and I feel like I should be moral, right? Because I'm compelled to. But that's not morality, right? If you feel compelled to be, if you're doing it for the sake of society, to be a good person in other people's eyes, that's not real morality, right? Asana, right? And the early ideas of asana, there's penance, right? Something to do to separate the body from the mind and come into a pure state of consciousness, and then asana as a seat of meditation. Patanjali's idea of as as a seat, right? Although the more I look at the Yoga Sutras, to be quite honest with you, the more I kind of change my mind about it. I think, well, actually, I can see a lot of tantric stuff there. I can see ideas that are not just about mental meditation or kind of yoga. I can see kind of the Hatha Yoga ideas, but let's look at the Hatha Yoga ideas then. Right? And they come from around the 8th century, I think, around 8th to the 15th century, I think, is the rough ballpark figure for tantric yoga. And we could say tantric, and tantric means a set of practices that are esoteric, like inward focused in nature, involving a continuous engagement in experience. So experiences aren't separated into right or wrong. It's just continuous engagement in all experience. And what else kind of defines Tantra? Tantra is hard to define. You need to define Tantra to understand Hatha. So we're trying to understand Hatha, we need to define Tantra. It's defined by use of mantra. So that's the one thing that Hatha Yoga doesn't have in common with Tantra, because Hatha Yoga doesn't inevitably always have mantra attached. But anyway, Hatha Yoga, right, what is it? And why does it not involve meditation? That isn't inherently involving meditation, because it's a thing in itself. Hatha Yoga is for the body, it's not for the mind. Hatha Yoga is a science of the body, of using the body to change the mind. And I suppose that's where I get off the bandwagon of asana, of the Patanjali's 8 limbs, in this idea of ascending. You go from moral conduct to asana to pranayama to pratyahara, because in tantric yoga, that's, although you do use all these aspects, it's not an ascendance from the body. The body is a valid source of knowledge, and a valid use, and a valid method, and a valid mythology in the body. And that's because the body is energy, and that energy shines the light of the mind. So in a certain sense, the body is somewhat higher than the mind, not lower than the mind, because it's actually giving the mind its power to shine. I mean, essentially, it's still lower, because the mind is actually the experience center. Even for tantric yoga, the mind is still the experience center. But nevertheless, the body is somewhat prioritized, because it's easier to hack, basically, because it's easy to get in there in the mind. I mean, because what we're looking for is to change neurological pathways. Yep. In modern scientific language, nothing more than that. There's nothing necessarily mystical, although it is mystical to change and transform one's mind state. There's no doubt about that, right? There's nothing kind of magical as such, right? This Hatha Yoga, right? And although it seems that way because it's written in old language, using different symbols and using a different worldview, basically what it's doing is it's using neurological pathways to transform one's states of mind. Yeah. But because it's really hard to get in there and tamper with the brain itself, use the body. Yeah, because the body is the gross vehicle. It was often said, I think I've heard this said a number of times in Indian texts, that the body is the grossest expression of the mind, and the mind and it works the other way around. The body is the grossest expression of the mind, and the mind is the subtlest expression of the body. I can't remember how it goes on the other side, but basically, the body is, the body makes the mind in a sense, or you can tamper with the body and affects the mind, and easier than you can go and tamper with the mind itself. Although that can be done. Obviously, we have Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, of thinking, of reasoning. Yeah, Bhakti Yoga, which is kind of using Bhakti Yoga is using the body as well in a way, right? It's using the emotions, right, to the emotions drawn in Bhakti Yoga to affect the change of the mind. Karma Yoga essentially using the body as well, really. It's acting in a certain way, trying to not act selfishly and act for the sake of others, do one's duty as such in the Bhagavad Gita, right? And then change the state of mind. But Hatha Yoga is kind of exciting because you're doing something immediate oneself. Yeah, and etymologically, the Hatha Yoga comes from the root ha, force. And we've mentioned that in James Mallenson's podcast a number of times. I've done a couple with him, and we talk about that quite a lot. I think that it's not this idea of sun, moon, ha, sun, tha, moon, but nevertheless, Hatha Yoga is related to the sun, moon, because the fundamental part of this tampering with the body or affecting the body is, and again, this is metaphorical and somewhat literal as well, I think, the use of the two central channels that run either side of the spine. Well, you've got three, right? Sushumna Nadi, the central channel of the spine, right? But we never use that normally. That's the case of entering the central channel when we have the Kundalini or the enlightenment experience. But we're not going to touch on that today because we're not doing that. We're talking about a much more pragmatic resolution of emotions today in yoga and how that works, right? So we're leaving out Sushumna today and looking at Ida and Pingala that run either side of the spine, right? And Pingala is the hot. It's the active. We used to say the masculine, although we don't really talk about gender anymore, right? But it's that kind of aspect of consciousness and of life, right? And Tha is the moon, is the passive. Yeah, it's the expression of the nervous system, which is the opposite, and we need both. We need active and passive, or you could talk about Shiva and Shakti and the marriage of the two. And you've got these two these nerves that run either side of the spine. As I understand it, Pingala runs up the right. It does run the right, but it crosses over and it relates to the left nostril, I believe. But then it also relates to the right brain. No, let's get that right. Pingala is left brain. Sorry. Nostrils, I can't remember, but also the nostrils make a difference because if you control the nostrils, they potentially also control the winds metaphorically, that run up the either central channel. Right? But so you've got these two central channels, and these are conveying the energy of the body. Yeah. And they're metaphorical, but some people say that's actually. I mean, and if you look at the two sides of your body, I would say there's recourse to say that they're quite physical. Actually, yeah. If you look at the two sides of the body and how they're different, and how there's a line. There's a sense of line from the back of the ear, yeah, down one side of the neck, through the shoulder blade, through the hip, all the way to the foot. There's a connection. There's a sense of connection down the whole side of a body, right? Of the body, yeah. And I would say there's a lot to be said that we can infer that these channels are actually somewhat real as well as metaphorical, that we have a passive and active side of our body, our being. We have an analytical side. We have a side of knowledge or being. Yeah. And we're always trying to fuse this active and passive element of ourselves. So the one that's doing and the one that's being. Yeah. And to finish that that explanation of Pingala and Ida off is that, again, Pingala is the sun, the sun channel, yeah. Ida is the moon channel. Ida runs up the left, Pingala at the right, Sushumna in the middle, right? And this is the basic tantric cosmology, as they say, the cosmology of the inner body, yeah. And Pingala relates because it crosses over, constantly crossing over, and then in the middle you have these other chakras, right? There's a nerve plexus. When they cross over, Ida and Pingala, this is to the Sushumna, they make a nerve plexus, and that's to do with particular qualities that one manifests in the body. So Muladhara chakra, the base chakra, to do with animal nature, right? To do with so basic desires, pleasure, aversion, yeah. Svadhisthana, to do with, it's the next one near the pubis, yeah, the genitals, to do with procreation, sexual desire. Manipura, to do with intuition, to do with power, to do with being oneself, yeah. And Hatha to do with the heart, to do with love, care, empathy, all those things. For Shuddha to do with expression, again, wisdom, right? Again, intuition, yeah, the throat, yeah. Ajna, knowledge, the center of knowledge. And Sushumna is the experience of oneness or enlightenment or whatever we want to call that. I've never experienced it, so I haven't got words for that one. The top of the head, right? Anyway, so you've got these three. But what I have experienced is the way that the emotions work. So I've got to get to that. So basically, what I wanted to say is that pink relates to the left brain because it crosses over. Yeah. So it's the left brain of logic, of reasoning, of action. Yeah. And Ida crosses over, relates to the right brain, which is being, feeling, experiencing, wisdom, knowledge. Yeah. And as I said, these are often related as Shiva and Shakti. Yeah. The active is I've got to get this right. I think the active is Shakti, right? It's a power, and the passive is Shiva, the state of being. But you need both, right? Not the one is better than the other. You need both. And in fact, it's said that if you have an injury on the left brain, right, the left brain could be very damaged or brain damaged for some reason, then that's going to make people difficult to function in the world. It's going to challenge them functionally, but they're probably quite happy, yeah, because the right brain is the being, the feeling, yeah, the experiencing. Yeah. But if you have an injury on the right brain side, which is related to, let's get this right, Ida, yeah, because Ida is on the left and it creates to the right brain, right? So that kind of creative feeling, intuitive nature, yeah. If you have an injury there, then it's obviously going to make you quite miserable. And evidently, through the scientific research, they found that injury on the right brain, even if the left is okay, that being in the analytical brain all the time, you're going to say that people tend to be quite miserable, even if they have that injury. Anyway, so interesting. And how do we affect this then? How do we go on to do something with our bodies, relating these strange shapes, these postures that we're making, to do something which is more than just recreating the wheel every day, right? You're doing the asanas to get more flexible, to get physical progress. How do we actually do something that will make a difference to our emotional lives inside? Well, first of all, what you're doing is you're playing with the grooves in the body. And in the consciousness, you have the vasanas or the samskaras, right? Not in the body, but in the consciousness. Yeah. So these mental grooves are pathways. That's what they were talking about, neurological pathways, right? The synapses fire together, right? They fire together, and they create habits. Yeah? So these, when you have certain default habits or reactions, right? You've created a synaptic pathway that's stronger. That's basically a vasana, yeah, a groove, literally a groove, right? Because as soon as you have an experience, that pathway, those synapses that fire together, they're so used to firing together that you immediately go there. So any small experience can, let me say in common parlance now, in the current language, trigger you. You have a tiny little experience of something and you're immediately there because that vasana, that groove is deep and those synapses are used to firing together. So you're stuck. I mean, basically you get to a certain age as an adult and you find yourself rather stuck. If anything like me anyway, you come to like 20 and it's like, well, there's all these habits that have been created through nature and nurture, right? Some of it is simply nature because, well, we have to understand also in the yogic view that karma passes on. So, and we know that kids born to the same parents, so different in temperament, right? How has that happened? Because they get the same parenting. Well, probably not exactly because younger and older get slightly different parenting, right? But nevertheless, similar parenting, parents, same parents, and they are completely different. So you've got nature and nurture, but by the time you get to the age of, say, 20, the synapses are pretty used to firing in a certain way. You have a pretty rigid personality, and if you don't do anything about it, as one gets older, these synaptic pathways become more and more ossified, more and more rigid, until you're really stuck in a small loop of personality without any leeway to be different, right? And that lack of spontaneity, that sense of a lack of freedom and a sense of knowing what one knows and liking what one likes and not like, it's just drudgery. Then you're just like a robot in the world because your synaptic pathways are just doing the same thing over and over. They hardly need any stimulus anymore to give you the same responses, and you're living like a Groundhog Day. So yoga gives you the freedom to change this, basically gives you the possibility of freedom, right? Because obviously we didn't create our experiences that happened to us, many of them. Yeah, we didn't even create the reactions to those experiences, really, because those reactions that we have to experience were related to reactions we had to past experiences that created the reaction we have to the current experiences, and those reactions we had to past experiences were also created by birth and our reactions to our parents, to us, and we never have freedom. So when yoga says kavalia, freedom, kavalia is aloneness, actually. The actual autonomy, that's what it means, sovereignty, autonomy. We finally take that the freedom not to be a robot. Because up to now, all those synapses have fired randomly to create these grooves. Yeah, a lot of it, most of it, we didn't have any idea we were creating. Just unconscious reactions led to reactions. In the end, you've got this whole personality going on. You didn't even create it. And then we protect it. Yeah, that's me. This personality is me. These reactions are mine. Yeah, these likes are mine. These dislikes are mine. And we become very kind of protective of that for some reason. But it wasn't even us in the first place that did it. So taking back one's freedom is the ability to kind of somewhat wipe this slate clean, to become like yoga would have it, you become a tabula rasa, right? That you completely wipe away the vasanas, the samskaras, so you have pure consciousness. My view on that is maybe more pragmatic, that we certainly if we're living in the world, we wouldn't want to have no personality or no sense of kind of likes and dislikes and I feel that we wouldn't want to completely wipe the slate clean. It seems like a foolish idea, but so I'm kind of a bit more pragmatic there, and all my own experience as well. I can only say as far as I got that it gives you the second chance when you play with the body to change these pathways that you can't change in your head. As I've mentioned many times, I got into yoga through going to years of therapy, of talking to people. It didn't make any difference. Didn't make any. In fact, it seemed to only make those pathways fire even more. Talking about it, those pathways seem to get stronger. And I didn't feel there's any way out. And the yoga worked. And it worked straight away because you're doing something with the body. It's a tool. It affects changing the synaptic pathways. Why does it do that? Well, that's the $1,000,000 question. You've got the Ida and the Pingala, either side of the body, right? And they're nerves, right? And if you change the stimulus on these nerves, something allows the mind to have more freedom to not fire along those mental pathways so quickly. How that works is more complicated, I think, to do with hormonal secretions, and I don't understand, so I'd just be parroting what I've heard here. But it's to do with the pituitary gland and the pineal gland in the throat and in the ajna chakra, the third eye, and how they relate to these nerves being stimulated in the body. But it's kind of complicated, and I have no experience of that myself, so I'll leave you to investigate that further if you find an adequate source. But what I can say is that when you're stimulating the spine, and this is the yoga modality, what I say is Hatha Yoga, really. What it's based on is spinal stimulation, right? You're doing all these. If we're looking at it as a modality of movement, it's strange. It kind of makes no sense. All this lotus stuff that's stimulating the sacrum, which is the seat of the energy, all these twists, and extensions and flexions that are constantly going on in every posture. Okay? We don't get that in another exercise, all this use of the spine. Often the spine stays straight, right? I don't know what you're doing, playing football or, even go to the gym, you use the spine in such a forceful manner. So the point of the yoga is you're using the spine and the nerves that wrap around the spine. And when you do that, when you squeeze, when you compress, when you exert pressure on those nerves, then you're affecting the neurological pathways of the brain, the vasanas. You're cleansing the karma, which means like cleansing the past impressions. It's not that emotions actually live in the body, right? They're not actually, we say the emotions are stored in the body. They're not actually there as in a place stored. It's just simply that those pathways have become so strong that there's you say you want to react differently. Yeah. Say you say, I've got to be more aware of my life now. And when someone does this or that, and I usually react like this, I'm going to react differently this time. Well, how likely is that? It's a weight. The odds are stacked against you because your habits are so strong, not the habit of just like, you could do this or you could do that. Like you just have a habit and you're more comfortable doing that. No, physically. That habit is created by the physical neurological pathways being wired together. And they say the nerves that are wired together fire together. So you just got these wirings. You've mapped your mind, not you, it happened to you. You mapped your mind and you're stuck. And you use the body, you can use the body to change that mapping. But in the moment, if you're just trying to think, well, I'd like to act differently, of course, it's very unlikely you're going to act differently because the weight of the possibility that the neurological pathway changes when it's deeply wired together is, It's unlikely. But things like I said, there's different ways to go about this. Jnana yoga, you can kind of do it through logic, right? Really, Jnana yoga originally was, pretty heavy use of the mind in logic. What's true, what's not true, and analyzing the nature of reality, with mental processes. Back to yoga. This makes a lot more sense to me in a sense, and this is still the prevalent use of yoga in modern day India, and has always been the main spiritual practice in every tradition, that you can affect the mind through creating different emotions to certain manifestations of archetypes. I know that sounds complicated, doesn't it? So you use a god. Right? This has always been the same in India. That you're not actually worshipping the god, right? You are, but you aren't. The god stands for qualities, right? Essentially, those qualities are in you. There's different incarnations of the gods. They're standing for different qualities. And when you worship the god in their different forms, in different ways, try to generate different kinds of emotions, knowing the stories around the gods, right, that create these kind of sense of emotion, it changes the mind states through changing the emotions in the body. Emotions are incredibly powerful. So you're doing some kind of in a certain sense, kind of hatha yoga, as much as you're convincing the body to act, to change the mind. But the Hatha Yoga is even easier than that. It's said to be, the Hatha Yoga is said to be the bluntest tool, right? The most basic, common, easy way, because you're just literally manipulating the body, like taking a piece of, we say plasticine, like a putty, and you're manipulating the body like that. And as you manipulate the nerves, things change. But things only change if you're aware, which is why Hatha Yoga has always been contextualized, in all the tantric texts. Remember, I said tantra is the broad frame of Hatha Yoga, because tantra, you're doing something which is, God, tantra is so hard to kind of differentiate exactly, but you're doing something continuous, which is with reality as it is. Maybe the one, again, the reasoning of Hatha Yoga not being complete tantra that people give is it doesn't use mantra, but nevertheless, using your whole life experiences, right? And bottom line is, I think what people don't want to take this up as a long-term practice is that it's difficult, right? Because the thing is that all these emotions, even if you don't do it well, even if you do it badly, and you're manipulating the spine and it throws up the different emotions, then you've got to look at these things, right? So what you could do is you can do it in a certain way where you actually suppress, where you can practice hard, practice forcefully, and actually suppress these things coming up more. That's the trickiness of it. Or you can do it in such a way where you can, and also because I think the useful thing, as I said before about Ashtanga, is you have a kind of framework around your experience. So when all the things come up again, and it's not actually like you're dredging up literal emotions or literal experiences, you might actual things that happen to you, but oftentimes you're vague, nebulous feelings, thoughts, impressions that might come up into the body again. And usually they're too much to bear, or very hard to bear. But if you have a whole framework around it, right, a framework of practice, similar location maybe, similar sequences, you start and end with a mantra. Kind of a mantra is always like mind protection, mantra, mind protection, protecting the space because you've made a little ring around it. So it's only in this space that you're going to do that. And then outside it, you're going to use your normal safety mechanisms again. But within this safe space, you can allow things to come up for a short time. If you do all that and allow the things to come up, but it also needs this bigger context around it as well. If you just do it, and you don't really know or don't have a usage of what you're doing, then it's likely to make you more unsettled, more ungrounded than before, because there's no context to what you're doing. Also, if you don't have this as a perspective, what I feel like is that we end up just with materialism in yoga, with yoga as a therapy, as a physical therapy. Then it's like, well, there's no reason to do a stretch. You could do stretch this way. You could do a stretch that way. In this way, you feel more your shoulder. In this way, you feel more your lats or your serratus, right? It doesn't matter, I mean, then people say, well, it's safe. And then that's why safety comes in, because then it's like, well, at least there's a reason now to stretch a certain way. Right? Oh, that's up for debate as well, right? Because it's not necessarily safe to stretch in a certain way, So everything is up for debate then, and people can say, well, just you could do it. You could do Trikonasana and feel the stretch on your side. Or you could do Trikonasana with the back foot turned in, like I prefer, and you could feel the stretch more around your hip. Well, you do it anyway. This, if you look at this as a model of Hatha Yoga in the way that it was in our roots of what we're doing now, and the first time that people use postures for the sake of postures, not postures for the sake of just transcending the body. And they first used the posture for the sake of posture, the body for the sake of body. They were doing an energetic practice, and that meant exerting pressure on the nerves. So to do that, you've got to, one, stretch inwardly, pull together, and two, you've got to use the diaphragm, because the diaphragm changes the thoracic and intra-abdominal pressure. If you put air into the body, it changes the pressure inside the body. So in using the diaphragm, you also change the pressure around the nerves, right? So two things. One, you create an isometric stretch. So you're stretching, you're trying to actually kind of pull together or compress more than stretch out of yourself, right? So you're pressurizing the nerves at the Eden Pingala that run either side of the spine. And secondly, using the diaphragm to create this pressure. But if you don't have that as a premise for Hatha Yoga, then it's like, well, it's an open canvas. And it's like, well, then it's about safety, how to stretch safely, or how to stretch more effectively for what, really, then? For what? Because, I mean, I can't even say the most effective way to stretch for physical progress necessarily. I mean, I can definitely say holding the muscles and in mapping them in groups is more effective. But, it only really makes sense, I think, if you kind of tether it to the precedent of creating internal pressure in the body, and that makes emotions arise. And if you contextualized it around that idea that what it is it's a practice to not only relax the nervous system, but actually to unrelax the nervous system. I mean, what you're trying to do is somewhat deregulate your own system to start again, right? So we're not just trying to get into the parasympathetic nervous system and calm the body down. Actually, we're trying to create a light stimulation to get into the sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight, with a certain type of breathing and moving, to get into the sympathetic, to get onto the level, which is a deep level of these impressions in the body again. Because only when you're at the level can you actually touch them and move around. And usually we're just at the superficial level because we can't operate from a deeper level all the time. So yoga puts you back in that very, very lightly stimulated state, not necessarily negatively, but in that sense of arousal, in that level of where you can actually touch these emotions again. It's not like you're trying to resolve them. I get there now and get into it, and now I can think about them and decide what I like and what I don't like. No, it's just that you're there with it, and they're able to manifest. I mean, metaphorically manifest, and then it's not tangible, is it? They're not in the nerves exactly, but being at that level that somehow allows this sense of cleansing to come up. So I think the greatest irony of modern yoga is that it's simply for relaxation, because it's not the case at all. It was never just for relaxation's sake. Only the last part, where you're doing closing series, you've got a fully relaxed state of the body, just to try and balance that light sympathetic state of the earlier practice. At the end, I would say, try and do the parasympathetic nervous system a favor and breathe more deeply, stay longer, and take the pressure off the neck. These closing series postures are usually to do with the neck, so we need the pressure off the neck, as it's a really important trauma center for the body. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention was that you've got two types of breathing to make this pressure. And this is why the diaphragm is so important. Diaphragm, a divider between two sides, like a fence. And this diaphragm that's in the middle of your body, that you can breathe there, right? You do breathe there, right? But usually in normal life, general life outside yoga, we breathe from the side of the neck muscles, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, the pecs, the intercostal, the ribcage muscles, and the diaphragm a little bit. But in yoga, you're just trying to breathe from the diaphragm, right? Or in, say, certain somatic practices, right? Not necessarily meditation, you're just trying to breathe from the diaphragm again. When you breathe from the diaphragm, you're doing something which is very cathartic. You know it when you take a deep breath. The diaphragm has this certain potency to it, but also it creates this pressure in the body. It's a nervous system stimulation, Hatha Yoga. Balancing, I'd say, force to force, and also this hatha, this folkloric etymology, which has a lot of truth to it. You're trying to balance the active and the passive state of your body, the doing part and the being part, the intuitive part, and the reasoning part, the trusting part and the analytical part. We need the logic, and the creativity. If one of these is out of balance in your life, you're going to be less happy than you would. And the more you bring the two in balance, metaphorically, they talk about cleansing the Ida and Pingala, and they say before Ida and Pingala are cleansed, right, we've got an imbalance. You're too logical, or you're too creative and intuitive. Yeah, until those two channels are cleansed, nothing can happen in the central channel of Sushumna, where you're again, metaphorical or otherwise, depending on your beliefs, you're raising the Kundalini and having this, for want of a better word, spiritual experience. Anyway, I wanted to say about the diaphragm at the end, right? So just to finish off, right? How do you change the pressure of the diaphragm between your upper body, because you've got two cavities in the body, lower cavity, your belly, the upper cavity, your chest, and the two spaces, right? There's basically two spaces in the body. The body's made of space, right? And the diaphragm connects these two spaces, and you can breathe in the upper cavity, your thoracic area, yeah, your chest, or you can breathe in the lower cavity, your abdominal area, your belly. Yeah? You're not actually breathing in the belly because you don't have lungs there, right? But you can create pressure of the air in that area, yeah? And it feels like you're belly breathing. And that, in very broad strokes, gets you into the parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest, belly breathing. And thoracic breathing is lightly stimulating, getting you into a little bit, very, very little fight or flight, yeah, mechanism of the sympathetic nervous system, right? So how do you change those two, and what do they mean? Well, as I mentioned, what Hatha Yoga is looking for is a light stimulation of the body. So you're trying to get into the sympathetic nervous system, yeah, until the end, when I would say you might change that, and you might experiment with belly breathing, in fact, like I am now in things like shoulder stand, you know, just to get into that rest or digest state to calm yourself down again. But until then, you're just lightly trying to get into that state of stimulating the nerves of the body through thoracic breathing. How do you do that? Well, the diaphragm is a muscle. Like any muscle, it has a place where it starts and where it stops, an origin, yeah, where it starts, and an insertion where it ends, right? So you can move the diaphragm from its origin or from its insertion, right? If you're moving it from its origin, then you have to stabilize the insertion, right? So that would be belly breathing. So the insertion is your rib cage, right? The origin is the diaphragm muscle, the cord of the diaphragm muscle, right? And if you stabilize the rib cage and then move just from the diaphragm, you can do it with me now if you like. Hold yourself under your armpits and breathe the diaphragm down. You'll notice the belly pushes out. Yeah. You stabilize the rib cage and you're breathing just from that diaphragm. Yeah. But if you use the transverse abdominis muscles, bandha, uddiyana bandha, right? And if you use these muscles, right, you stabilize the origin of the diaphragm, the muscle that itself, yeah, the belly of the muscle, yeah, and you'll move from the insertion instead, yeah. So if you do it again, you don't, right. So you use your lower abdomen a little bit, then you'll notice that you're breathing wide, yeah. Your rib cage is moving laterally wide. And you're moving from the insertion, not the origin, because you've stabilized the origin to move from the insertion. And then you're taking the breath into the thoracic cavity. Yeah. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but it's not really that complicated. You can move the diaphragm from two places. You can move it from the origin, in which case the insertion will be stabilized. That's belly breathing. You can move it from the insertion, in which case the origin, the diaphragm itself, will be stabilized with the Uddiyana Bandha. That is thoracic breathing that you're trying to do in the yoga asana practice. Anyway, there probably could be a whole podcast itself with examples, but probably like to gloss. It's a tendency of mine to gloss over things too quickly, I think. But don't underestimate the importance of that idea, because that changes everything in practice. Anyway, and when you're creating that interthoracic pressure, the pressure of the upper chest, it stimulates the nerves of the spine. So that's why you're trying to breathe in that manner for yoga. But in normal life, when you're in the rest and digest state of the nervous system more, you're trying to breathe from the belly. The belly should be pushing out. The belly should be pushing out as the diaphragm moves down. Anyway, a few ideas on Hatha Yoga. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it hasn't been too confusing. And some of the Bihar School of Yoga books do mention these kind of things, so it's probably worth having a look at some of those. As always, I'm not saying you have to use your yoga for any particular reason. You can use it simply to ground yourself, to think clearer, as a meditational practice. We can use it as a sense of coming together with other people, community. Yeah. We can use it as a sense of emotional cleansing. I had a huge sense of catharsis starting to do this yoga many years ago. Or we can use it for this idea of hatha, to stimulate the body in a certain manner. Or, you know what? Maybe we're doing all these same things at the same time in the end. Eh? Anyway, interesting to think about, I hope. And thanks for sticking with me. I know it's been a more complicated one than perhaps we would like it to be, but I'll be back with a normal guest next week. And until then, have a great week. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.